Man, I'll tell you what, it's getting close, so we're going to talk about this documentary. Phillip Forgit, who's been a guest many times in the past, and he'll be here in the future. And let me tell you a little bit about him. Phillip is a teacher professionally, and he ran for Congress back a number of years ago. You may recall that. And he's a veteran of the Iraq War, awarded the Bronze Star. He's also an acclaimed teacher, won the 2005 National Education Association Foundation Award for Teaching Excellence. And I tell you what, you look at anybody who's had any modicum of success in their life, there was somewhere along the line some teacher who saw something in you. Not that you're special, not that you're some genius, but saw the talent you had and encouraged it. So, you know, we owe a lot to our teachers, do we not? Especially the good ones. Like Phillip. He ran for the Virginia House of Delegates, anyway, blah, blah, blah. He's a graduate of William & Mary with a BA in History and an MA in Elementary Education. He lives in Williamsburg with his wife, Dawn. Also a school teacher, and their 3 kids, and they attend Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church. And you got the documentary, too. How you doing?
I'm doing well this morning, Tony. Thanks for having me on again.
Now, tell us a little bit about it. For those who don't know, I think we've set up a little bit. And what do you do now for a living?
Right now, I'm the executive director. For the last 15 months, I've been the executive director of the Virginia Education Association. That represents 51,000 plus teachers and what they call education support professionals. It would be like food service workers, janitors, teachers' aides. It's mostly teachers. About 93% of the membership is teachers, so statewide.
And so your office is in Richmond?
Office is in Richmond, but there's 23 district offices. I travel all through the state and sometimes out of the state for the job.
Now, how many times were you in Iraq?
I was in Iraq once with the military, with the Navy, in 2005, 2006, and then the second time I went back to film as a civilian, and that was in the winter of 2009 for about 3.5 months.
What's your MOS in the Navy? What's your job?
I was an intelligence specialist. Yeah, I've just recently stepped out after 10 years in the reserves, so ended as a chief petty officer.
What did you expect when you got in country? How was it different than your expectations?
You go through a lot of training leading up to it, and I was actually slated to go somewhere else, and sort of in a few weeks before I left, I got redirected to Iraq, so that was kind of an interesting switch when I had sort of prepared for one situation and got slotted for another. I had read an awful lot about the country, and I knew a little bit about it and had some of the history, so I had some of that. But the culture, you're never quite prepared for something as sort of foreign as Iraq. Now, they're in terms of Arab countries, they were probably more Western and more secular than most other Arab countries, so there was some affinity for Western culture. But certainly I had no, encounter in my lifetime with Muslim culture, Muslim religion, the foods, culture, music. So that was an interesting part of the experience. But even just the weather is very hot, very, very, very hot. And so it's much different than Virginia and much different than training, obviously.
Now, Phillip Forgit is here. And also, if you want to call, if you have a question during the course of the interview, President Obama announced last week that the United States is going to be pulling out of Iraq, the agreement that actually came to be during the administration of President Bush. Somebody who's been there, we hear all these different stories, and I don't know what the dynamic is there, what's going to happen. We hear all these horror stories about what could happen with Ahmadinejad, and one knows he doesn't have our best interests in heart, and I'm sure he'd like to have a pan-Arabia, Persian, Shia state or something of that nature. What do you think about the pullouts?
Well, these were negotiated under George W. Bush, and I find it interesting, obviously, all the criticism of Obama of pulling out. But the fact is these were agreements negotiated under George W. Bush's administration, the status of forces agreement. The Iraqis want us out. There were negotiations to obviously hold some troops back, but the Iraqis were not willing to entertain that, so we're out. And that's per the agreements that were signed, under the Bush administration. In terms of what happens next, it's really up to the Iraqis. And certainly Iran has quite a bit of pull in the country because of the Shia, the affinity for Shiism between both the Iraqi Muslims and Iranian Muslims. But that being said, though, I think a lot of the influence, it's religious. You have Muqtada al-Sadr and the Mahdi militia, and that group, they're sort of aligned with Iran. You have a lot of influence in the south. So there's going to be influence from Iran, and there's a trading influence too. I mentioned last time the products that come into Iraq, many of them are either from Saudi Arabia or Iran. A lot of products come in. So there's a trading relationship there. There's certainly a religious affiliation there. But Iraq is an independent country, and though there might be influence, I'm not so certain that you'll see a sort of pan-Persia alliance between Iraq and Iran. I mean, there is a history there.
I worry about how close they are. Well, first of all, Persia has not attacked anybody in over 100 years. But we saw in many of our wars how many Americans were Roman Catholics, but yet they were killing and fighting German Roman Catholics twice in the last century, or Italians. So I wonder, I hope in a way, whatever hope is worth, that they remember that horrible war they had, about a couple of decades ago, where hundreds of thousands were killed, gas, all kinds of horrible. So there's got to be some sort of nationalism that I would imagine isn't going to drive them together. There's got to still be a wedge there.
No, there's definitely nationalism, and there's definitely a patriotism of a sort in Iraq. Obviously, there's layers to Iraq. There's religion, there's tribal influences, and all that plays a part in what will happen to Iraq. But I wouldn't be predicting that there'd be some kind of pan-Persia where Iran and Iraq would have an alliance of that nature. But I do see, trading partnerships probably getting a lot more close. But people forget, that there's been a lot of friction between Iraq and Iran, obviously during the war because of, just military supplies and other things, influence of terrorists and all that type of thing. But even over boundaries, I mean, they've had skirmishes here and there during this war, even down in the Basra area, over territory and over lines that have been drawn. So I think there'll be enough friction over other issues that you will never see the type of alliance that people fear. But it'll still be a trading partnership, I'm sure, and an economic connection between the two countries that may make, Western nations uncomfortable, but it's only natural that they're gonna
like us in
trade
Canada.
With their neighbors. Well, exactly, Canada, Mexico. I mean, it's similar. So,
now for somebody, Phillip Forgit, to do what you're doing, to go through all this trouble, to make this documentary, there is a need for it. Obviously, there is something you think that is not being told, a story that people don't know, and that's why you're doing this, I would imagine.
Yeah, when I was in Iraq, right before I had gone, I had applied for that foundation award that I ultimately won. And the reason I had applied for it, I had done a small science character, a thing called Tectonic Text, and had made a small movie back about 10 years ago. And when I applied for the award, I thought, well, maybe I'd come back and make another movie of that, do a sequel, hopefully not a B movie, maybe an A- or something. But when I got to Iraq, the relationships that I had with Iraqis, I worked very closely with Iraqi army and also civilians. And, I really felt in the run-up to the war that the media had failed in sort of laying out the reasons for going to war. And then certainly when we were in the war, I really felt that the media in general had done a real disservice to the public and not sort of laying out.
Let me going back. Just you said in the run up to the war, what had the media failed to do? What should they have done?
I don't think there was as much questioning of the intelligence that was out there. I think there's sort of the famous incident with the uranium, the cakes and the African influence and all that. And I think there was too little questioning of what was happening. And I probably share with a lot of your viewers some libertarian aspects, particularly the aspect that we haven't declared a war since World War II, and so I think when nations go to war, there's a reason the founders wanted Congress to declare war, and that was so that the country would be behind that every person would be on notice as having signed up for this, and it's too easy right now to simply go out and do what we do without any backing really from Congress. And I know they have these votes and things, but that's not the same as a declaration of war. It doesn't unite the country.
And a professional fighting force.
Correct. And, we don't have a volunteer army. Well, we have a volunteer army. We don't have a draft anymore. So that's another thing, too. The impact is not on everyone. And certainly when we're in a war now, it's
not somebody leaving what they do to defend our country. It's somebody doing what they do.
Right.
It's not the same thing. That's not what Jefferson envisioned.
So the impact isn't as great on, the American society. Not everybody knows someone who's gone over. Not everybody knows. So they don't know the impact and the cost of that war. And it doesn't matter which side you were on in terms of whether we should have gone or not gone. But I think it would have been imperative for the press to have done a better job of sort of laying out and questioning what was being said and not said in the run-up to that war. And again, regardless of which side you landed on and whether we should have gone or not gone, well, that's immaterial. The fact is they should have laid it out.
The best argument that nobody made at the time that was so incredible to me, if they had any nuclear capability, the Israelis would have taken it out. If they had chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction, he probably would have used them in the first war. I mean, if he had them. Yeah, and if he did, what were they? Mustard gas? Stuff that has been around since World War I? Is that what he had? And was there any education on what is the shelf life of these? So, yeah, it was very upsetting, and I guess they did drop the ball. There seemed to be, and I didn't understand it, and I thought that perhaps it had been because so many of our elected representatives, it wasn't like the World War II generation, or you're talking about the Russ Potts generation, where they all really knew what war was. And whether it be on talk radio, when I heard all these chicken hawks just cheering for it, these guys who had never heard a shot fired in anger, who had no idea what it does to even the people who don't get hurt at all, who just come back, they were cheering for it. It was
and
an unsavory moment.
At the time, there were very few, if you go back and look at the percentage, very few congressmen and congresspersons, congresswomen had military experience. Right. You know, it was a different generation that was there for those decisions, and it's very easy to play, you know, Monopoly with you know, numbers and persons that are unknown to you. It's different to be on the ground and see the impact of those decisions. And again, there's reasons to go to war, and you know, certainly those were laid out. But whether there was a real deliberation by the press as to how you know, how valid those reasons were.
And then once we were there, they continued to drop the ball.
Yeah, and that's where this film comes in, because this film isn't political. It simply records a time in history of a provincial election in this town called Sababor, Iraq, which is actually kind of a suburb in some respects of Baghdad. It was about 10, 15 miles outside of Baghdad. And it was a small little town, probably about the size of Williamsburg, maybe about 40,000 people when I visited there. And it's just what I had wanted to do was just capture this story. I had been over there. I had broken bread with Iraqis, and I just felt like the context, the layers that are involved in Iraqi society and in this war. I thought wanted to go tell that story, and I thought this was a nice microcosm of sort of the Iraqi universe, and it would be an interesting way to bring that story home to Americans. And the other thing, too, the story is sort of bracketed by this Captain Dan DeGotti, and his Stryker Brigade. It's Bravo 214 out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And so the story is bracketed by their experience in this town and by his personal story. And so it's sort of bookended, and then we sort of use him as the narrator, and he essentially leads the viewer through this town. And so we get to see all these different strata of society, from tribal sheikhs to Sons of Iraq, which are sort of like a neighborhood watch armed with AKs, you know, sort of these militia groups to protect the peace. We see, you know, principals and teachers and shop owners. And so you really get a sense of the complexity of the society and what is going on in this little town. And so it's a small story, it's a little story, and hopefully I've been able to capture this one moment, you know, in 2009 during these provincial elections.
Where and when? Well, he's drinking a glass of water. It's going to be at the Kimball Theater in Williamsburg, and it's going to be on November 11th, 7 p.m., adults $750, seniors and children $650, military free in uniform. For advance tickets, call 1-800 History, HISTORY, have it your way by calling 1-800-HISTORY. Now, as a teacher, was there public education in Iraq?
Oh, yes. And there's a great veneration for teachers in that society. I mean, more so than perhaps an American society.
The tribesmen are literate? Now, I remember, didn't Saddam Hussein wanted everybody to be able to read? Is that the case? Is there a great deal of erudition?
There is an educational system in Iraq. I mean, there is a real emphasis on that, and particularly
for men and women?
Oh, yes, for men and women. Now, there's differences, obviously, and you'll see in the film that, you know, essentially when they're in elementary school, you know, boys and girls go to school together. Many times they're divided in the classroom and sort of segregated from one another. But once they get to sort of the middle school, high school, in general, in most parts of the country, boys and girls won't go to school together. The boys will come at one time, and the girls will come at another time, or they'll go to exclusive schools.
How important is religious instruction? How important is that to them?
It depends in the part of the country you're in. I mean, for the most part, I would say that the role of religion is more central to the lives of any Iraqi than perhaps in America in terms of public education. But there are schools, and as part of the film, I had been in other areas of the country which don't appear in the film, but I got to see other public school settings. If you're in a place like Baghdad, it's a lot more secular. And depending on the neighborhood, if you're in the Qadamiyya neighborhood, then yes, you're going to see pictures of Shia, prophets and religious figures. They're going to pray. If you're in other parts of Baghdad, it's very secular. You might not see as much. You might see a Muslim prayer up on the wall, but they're not going to do as much with that. But in the more rural areas and even in Sababor, there's more religious instruction. Usually there's some time given to that. And certainly there's religion is in the buildings. I mean, you certainly see things up.
Reading Tariq Aziz, who was his right-hand man, Saddam Hussein, was a Roman Catholic.
Right.
Do you see churches there?
The Christian religion has been somewhat suppressed in some ways since the fall of Saddam.
Since the fall of Saddam.
Before that, Saddam had a tolerance. Obviously, Aziz would be a symbol of that. I mean, the fact that he was in the administration. He was much more of a secularist. Saddam was, and perhaps the present rulers who are, more Shia and probably a lot more Maliki, the prime minister, and so they're a lot more religious, perhaps, than Saddam was. Saddam sort of found religion toward the end of his regime as he felt the pressures of religious conservatives in his country. And in fact, the most telling example of that was on the flag. He placed the words Al Akbar, God is great, and there were 3 stars at the time. But they've since pulled the stars. The government has, and now it just says Allah Akbar on the flag. So the stars are gone.
One wonders, do you think that was a true conversion on the part of Saddam or political expediency?
I think it was political expediency. I actually had visited a mosque in the Baghdad area where the minarets were actually, if you looked at them, they looked like AK-47s, and I'm not kidding. They looked like they had a barrel of a gun, and they go up, and it's very interesting to see. So he tried to combine sort of militarism with the religious element to protect his regime toward the end, and obviously it didn't work because of the invasion.
What was the symbol the Crusaders had on their shields? Boy, if that's never happened before, try to tie those two together, huh?
But so there's definitely a religious influence, and but the government now is certainly.
What do you think
more
about you making the film? The people that you came into contact with, were they all willing to talk to you, or the gentleman who did the narration?
Yeah, I didn't have. I mean, there were folks that didn't want to be filmed. There were other situations where I could film in certain areas, and this would. Certainly in the American military, you have to be careful about what you shoot. I mean, there's certain devices and machinery and things, so you have to be careful about that. And that's sort of operational security. And given my background, I certainly understood that. But I didn't have any censorship per se, where you can't shoot this. I mean, the only time that would happen is if the person I was shooting would say, I really don't want to be on film. And there were a few people like that who just didn't want to be filmed, and that was fine. But for the most part, people were very willing to tell their stories on camera. And certainly there was a great risk to that. I mean, they were informed that the hope was this would be a film in America, that it may end up on television at some point in America, and so they knew that their faces would be seen. So there is danger in that in the country, but I had no issues with censorship or issues of people not wanting to talk to me about what was going on in their country.
Now, whether you're a person like myself who thought that it was an ill-thought-out venture and we shouldn't have done it, we have, and the thing is done. So, armed with that knowledge, let's go beyond that. Do you think, in your opinion, of course, whose else's opinion would you have, that we, America, the United States, is better off with the Iraq of today and the situation with the Iran of today than we were back on September 10th, 2011?
I'll put a caveat on. I think the Iraqi people are certainly better for having gotten rid of Saddam Hussein. I mean, I want to say that up front. But that has little to do with America and its interest. And I would say that when Saddam was there, as evil and tyrannical as he was a blocking point to the extremism of Iran. And so from a foreign policy perspective, from America's interest, you have to wonder what we have opened up here. We certainly have allowed an opportunity for Iran to have a lot more influence in the region, to be a lot more active than they would have been had Saddam still been there. But again, I'll be the first to say the Iraqi people are much better off for having rid themselves of Saddam Hussein with obviously our help. Yeah,
that's good. And did they feel that way in large enough numbers where it will benefit our children? You know what I mean? Future generations down the road. Did they feel that way? Are they thankful to America? We always hear about how the French hate us. We saved their butts twice.
Well, I don't know if gratitude or thanks would be the word. I think there's certainly a lot of Iraqis, and I felt it both times. Back when I went in for the military, it was 2005, 2006. That was a pretty trying time in the war, and before things really started to turn our way with what was called the Awakening, which was where we really reached out to this sort of the Sunni element, created these Sons of Iraq and militia groups. But even then, I mean, the groups I were dealing with obviously were getting military resources from us, weapons, uniforms. So you've got to take that in the context in which that's coming. But the fact is, they were supportive, but there was always an element of, but it's our country, and eventually you need to go, you need to leave. Thank you for getting rid of Saddam, but it's our country, you need to leave. And I would say there's a spectrum of views, and certainly there are people who never wanted us there, who lost out because of the war, particularly the Sunni elite. That were, obviously the elite of the country that were with Saddam. Saddam was a Sunni. Those folks certainly, the Ba'athist of that time, the Ba'athist Party, those elements certainly are not happy that we came. I think a lot of the Shia element, particularly the sort of more moderate element, is probably grateful that we came and did this and we got rid of Saddam.
Did their work for them.
Yeah, basically yes. And so, but they too don't want us there forever. And I think that the negotiations, the way they broke down over remaining troops, certainly suggests that at least the government and the elements that are representing the government certainly reflect that it's our country, it's time for you to go. So yeah. I don't know if gratitude would be right word. Obviously there's been a lot of turmoil and destruction in the country.
Think of the Virginians after the war between the states. Yeah, How thrilled were they about having Union soldiers on the street corner?
Exactly.
And they were the same religion, spoke the same language, the same ethnic background.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of resentment in the country, but I think there's elements that are again, I don't know if the word grateful is correct, but certainly appreciate that Saddam is gone. But now they're on to other things. I mean, when you don't have water, don't have electricity, when you don't have roads, when your schools are closed because of terrorist elements or militia elements. I mean, you have other things to worry about. When you just can't get food. So Saddam's long gone now, and so the country has turned its attention toward the future.
Long ago, when I was 19 years old, I can remember thinking to myself, these people don't give a damn about capitalism or communism. They just want to make sure the water buffalo's alive and the rice paddy's working well.
Well, and
there wasn't too much else.
I think that's everywhere. I think that's a pretty universal human feeling. I mean, how many of our citizens in this country really care what's happening at the federal level or care about politics? All they want to do is, have a job, send their kids to school, hope things are safe, health care. They just want the basic needs, and I think that's reflected obviously in the interest in politics.
So in other words, what you're saying is there would be a problem if all those things that we grow to expect, all the services that we grow to expect, are not there for them over a long period of time.
Oh, definitely.
They're going to blame us.
Oh, I think people would be very more interested. I would think people would be more intently interested in politics and what politicians do if more and more things go away over time. But you keep wondering even now with the struggles we're in with the economy, when will people wake up? When will people get serious? When will the adults arrive to have the serious discussions about where we go as a country, how we afford and sustain what we do, which we obviously can't do right now. And that's not a Democratic problem or a Republican problem. It's an American problem. And that's really the issue right now, between the two parties. Neither one has much of a solution, and there's not much of a choice right now. And I think that's reflected in the apathy that the public, this election that's coming up for, the state races, the House and the Senate. I can't imagine it's going to be a big turnout. I'd be surprised if it is. But sadly, it's a very, very important election.
By the way, I just want to say right now, I live in James City County, and I vote for the candidate who has the least stuff, the least number of pieces of mail in my mailbox. If I don't hear from you, you got my vote. I'll tell you right now. I actually got like 3 of the same yesterday.
I thought you voted for the smartest person in the race. I thought that was your rule.
Well, you know what? I can't find any anymore, so I've given up on that. They're all about equal on that level. You know what I mean? It's sort of an equal thing there. Is it the Kimball or Kimball?
It's the Kimball Theater, and it's my 11-11-11 plan. It's November 11th, 2011, 7 p.m. at the Kimball Theater. It's Veterans Day. I think the picture does real honor to our servicemen, and I think it certainly, points out the context and layers of Iraqi society in this moment in time at these provincial elections. But I really hope folks will come out. Military is free and uniform. We really would love to see a lot of folks out from the military, so we hope they'll come out.
Burke, you thinking about going? All right, I'm going to be there. I'm certainly going to
go.
And
it's also a portion of the proceeds benefits the College of William Mary School of Education. I graduated from there. I'm an alumnus at the school twice, and so we're trying to do a little something for them that night as well. The dean of the school will be there, and it's one of our top 20 schools of education in the country. I'm very proud to be an alumni there, and so we're hoping to help them out that night as well.
We had, Wilfred Kale? He was in here yesterday,
yep.
Our good buddy Wilfred. Remember, the Kimball Theater, Williamsburg. Tickets, adults $750, seniors, children $650, military. What exactly is a senior? How old is a senior?
I'm not sure, Kimball.
I think
it
might be
like 60,
60 years
61,
old,
yeah.
There you go, Bert. Oh, Bert's not there yet, but I am. Military, free in uniform. For advance tickets, 1-800-HISTORY. What are these drops I've got here? The film open. Can we hear that?
Yeah, let's listen to the film open.
Here's the film open.
Of all the sensations you can feel in Iraq, the most powerful is the unmistakable odor of gas and burning trash. Except for the rotting vegetables of the market, almost everywhere it smells of diesel fuel and burning rubber. Whether it's people burning trash to stay warm or families cooking with their propane stoves, someone's always setting something on fire.
That requires a little bit of explanation. What would we be seeing there?
Well, I don't want to give too much away of the movie, but it's an opening that hopefully intrigues people into being interested in the rest of the movie. But he's sort of laying out his experience. We've just sort of moved from the beginning of the war, which sort of sets the context, to we set him up as who he is, where he's from. He's sort of an everyman. I mean, he was not West Pointer. He was sort of a college student. He went into the military to pay off student loans. We set him up and his family, and then he starts reflecting on Iraq, and this is sort of the scene that sort of brings him back into his service there. So it's an interesting opening. I think it's gonna be.
It's got me curious. Let's hear the
curious,
sounds of it. Now, the next one I see here says Bravo Troop. What is that?
I'm not sure
let's
on
find
this
out.
clip. Yeah, let's
find
run it.
Even among the soldiers I'm training, there is a wide range of hopes and concerns for Sabah and for the country.
My biggest worry.
Go ahead.
Oh, these are just the soldiers from Bravo Troop. They had been in Sabah and when I was filming there. And now what's happened, remember, Degati, the captain you just heard, is the bookend for the film. He actually is training his old troop in Fort Irwin. He had moved on to another job, and so now he's at a new command, and he's doing training at a place called Fort Irwin, and his old company comes through. So these are his former soldiers, and they're now reflecting as they get ready to go back for a third time as to what they think of Iraq and what's to come.
Even among the soldiers I'm training, there is a wide range of hopes and concerns for Sabah and for the country.
My biggest worry that's going to happen to that city is that all the hard work that we put into it can go to wayside with one IA brigade coming in and not really caring about the security. Because that was what the people love the most. They could go to bed at night with not without worrying if the Americans were going to kick in their door or if somebody was going to come into their house and steal from them. They knew they were secure and safe.
My greatest fear would be that the ethnic groups would resume fighting again without the security. So the Iraqi police, the Iraqi army, the local leaders in the city, they need to step up, and they need to keep the city secure so that people can live normal lives.
I hope for the country of Iraq, can maintain some of the security we helped set up for them. I hope the government takes, and I hope they just run with it. It'd be a real shame if we went over there since 2003, and all these guys have gone over there, have been getting killed. It'd be just a huge waste.
I wonder, Philip, if you had a situation, I remember hearing about the elections, and you'd hear Saddam Hussein won 99% of the vote. Now, if I'm hearing this, and you got half a brain in your head, you're thinking all elections are shams. Were there any credible elections in addition to the one with Saddam before? Is there a precedent for having any belief in the electoral process in Iraq?
I don't believe so. I'm not an expert on Iraqi history, but certainly most of Iraqi history is either monarchs or tyrants. I mean, there's an affinity in that culture for strongmen, and so I would suspect that the answer would be no. That there's, and that's part of the issue in the film.
Them.
Yeah, there's a line in the film that the captain utters about it's establishing a democracy isn't like setting up a McDonald's franchise, and I just thought it was a very telling point. Because it's not easy, and we attempt this in many countries, Western powers do, and it's difficult not knowing the culture. Our history, we have American Revolution, but there's a foundation upon which that was built that dates back to the Magna Carta. I mean,
sure.
So there's a foundation of sort of cultural experience and context that's ever building over centuries.
Millennium.
Yeah, over centuries.
Right.
In Iraq, overnight, we're trying to establish the aspects of democracy.
No Reformation, no Enlightenment.
Yeah. So,
very different.
So it's a very difficult stretch for the nation. Now, by all accounts, particularly this provincial election in 2009, they were honest, free, and fair. I'm certain, as even in our country, that there's irregularities from here and there. But for the most part, all international observers felt that these elections were free and fair and for the most part honest. So, and I certainly witnessed the elections. They had all kinds of safeguards for the boxes and the ballots. I mean, there was a lot of security involved, and it was Iraqis. I mean, this was not the Americans. This was the first election where the Americans had no direct involvement, whereas before they provided security for the elections. In this case, particularly in this town, they were by the law were observers from afar, and they certainly set things up in advance and helped the Iraqi army. But the day of the election, they weren't even allowed into the polling areas. In fact, I had to get a special permission to go film, and I wasn't allowed to walk in with Americans. I had to walk in with Iraqi army to shoot the footage and with Iraqi election officials. So I wasn't even allowed to be accompanied by American troops that day, which I thought was interesting. It was kind of them standing up and saying it's our country.
I was recently reading about how when the English, and after World War I, and they invented Iraq and thought it would be a good idea to put the Kurds and the Sunni and the Shia all in one place, and whether or not they'd need 300,000 troops or whether or not they would need air power. And it's interesting to me how things never changed, because one of the problems that the French, who at the time had the Lebanon and Syria, and the British were there in Iraq, and even then it was all about the oil. And the French had a problem because they thought that the British were handling it unrealistically. Churchill created a situation where they had this guy Faisal that they were going to put in, and it's amazing. They made this guy the king of Iraq. He's king the first time he sets foot in Baghdad, which is amazing when you look back at the history as these people, their recollection of all this. And their problem was that the British had what they called the Dominion system, whereas these countries like Iraq allegedly would have internal rule and internal dominion over themselves, but their foreign policy would be British, when the French thought that certainly in the Lebanon and Syria, they didn't want that, because they didn't want these people thinking that, yes, we too should be able to vote on everything. And man, if it's not exactly the same now, and you wonder how it is with Assad and all these guys, and they think, oh, what are they doing over there?
Well, I think, it's sort of those lessons of history, and
as you know, it has been said, those who do not learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat the 6th grade. I'm sorry.
It's true, though. It's a valuable lesson. But the sad thing is, it's our rulers, our political elites that didn't learn those lessons of history, and we do it from time to time.
They kept quoting Churchill, and you'd see him, and you'd see George Bush called Churchillian. Churchill said the biggest mistake he ever made was putting an English army in Mesopotamia. So many people, like the Bible and the Constitution and Churchill, three things everybody talks about, nobody's actually read what they ever said.
Well, I mean, the history in that country is certainly would have been telling, and if people had studied it and known the cultures and the dynamics of the religion and the tribal influences too, that plays a part.
But you're positive for the future. You sound positive.
I'm positive in the sense that, with Saddam gone and with these years of sort of American influence, that it's possible that Iraq could develop into it won't be the republic that we have, it won't be the democracy we have, but it's possible that they may have the type of future that they deserve just as human beings. But there's so many influences in that country. There's the Sunni Shia split is very real. The Kurds are a nation within a nation. There's conflict and stress there over the oil. So terrorism will still exist in that country. There will still be bombings. There will still be religious fights.
And the relationship between them, the Kurds, and the Turks, and that could go off
You've
at any time.
got that, and that influences NATO. There's issues there because obviously Turkey's a NATO partner. That influences what we do in Iraq with the Kurds and what they do with the Kurds. So there's a lot of tension. So, I mean, hopeful or cautiously optimistic might be a better couching of it. But, it's a kind of situation where anything could change very, very quickly there. As we begin this final pullout leading up to January 1, hopefully, as those soldiers said, and these are sergeants, these aren't high generals that were speaking just now. I think what they said has a lot of wisdom. Their all they can have is hope that the country will take this opportunity and run with it.
Everybody over 18, everybody over 21 votes. How do they pick who gets to vote?
I'm not sure the age limit, actually.
Can women vote?
Women can vote. And there's actually, the way their system works, it's a parliamentary system. And unlike this country where there's basically two major parties, there's 103 different parties. And the way that the ballot looks about the size of a poster, and you'll see all this in the movie, but they for these provincial elections, there were 57 seats within this province. Then there's 103 parties. Now, you'd vote for a candidate, but you vote for a party first and then the candidate. And if the party wins enough votes, then the party, even though you made a preference for candidate, they will select from their slate who they want to fill the seat. Women are allowed to vote, and actually there's almost like an affirmative action plan, if you will, for the Iraqi parliament, in that I believe it's about 25% are guaranteed to be seats represented by women. And women can win more seats than that, but there's guaranteed representation for women in parliament.
God love that.
Well, I mean, it's just a reflection of the society. I mean, they do, despite our sort of popular misconceptions about Arab countries in general, in Iraq, women, though there are certainly areas where there's sort of conservatism that keeps them down, Iraqi women have had a history of being lawyers and doctors
rights,
and being out.
It's there.
Yeah, it is there, and the women would probably argue in that country, and
And we're rapidly running out of time. They have internet access.
Oh yes, very much so. In fact, many of the public schools,
good, man.
some of the public schools I was in, had better facilities than some of the schools I've been in Virginia. So I mean, they had computer systems out. They had, and then others were more rural and just desk and things.
Well, what's left for you now? You got about a minute. Tell me what's left for you that you got to get up and all together before the big day.
Well, we've got posters out. We've got lots of people talking about it. Really, I just want folks to come out. We're just trying to drive out some turnout, make sure that we have a sellout. We'd love to have the military come, and it's 11/11/11. Just please come out November 11th,
Armistice Day,
2011, Veterans Day.
Now I'm going to be there. Hey, come on out. We're gonna now. If we would, Dom, you're probably going to leave now. You're going to make it out to Richmond now.
Yeah, eventually.
Okay. Now, set them up. We'll set them up with a couple of live lines next week, the day of the event, certainly, a couple of days before the event, and get them on a couple of times before that. And we'll keep this poster here. I'll keep talking about it. Here's the deal. Head on out. See for yourself. Draw your own conclusions. Always hear about, hey, you guys never do anything on the peninsula. We're doing something on the peninsula. Well, he is, and I'll just be there hanging out. Kimball Theater, Williamsburg. Easy to find. Adult $750, senior children $650, military free and uniform, advance tickets 1-800-HISTORY. Is there a website or something you want to talk about?
They can go to the Colonial Williamsburg website and Kimball Theater, and they can also get tickets through that as well. So the Colonial Williamsburg site as well.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. We'll talk to you again. We'll have Phillip on a couple of times with a live line, and we'll talk about this. And then what I'd like to do is schedule him on and get him on after it, like the week after it. You don't have to come and drive all the way over the place. You can do it by the phone, but I like having you here. Do whatever you want, what's convenient for you, and if we can get some reaction to it.
Oh, I'd be happy to come.
That'd be
back.
fun, wouldn't it?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, it's a cool thing that you're doing. I always enjoy talking to you. And Phillip Forgit, Lions of Babylon, A Soldier's Story, Kimball Theater, Williamsburg, Armistice Day, or as they now call it, you young people, Veterans Day, November 11th, 7 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony.
All right,
Appreciate
Phillip,
it.
we'll talk again.